right, so I just love to show this slide just to show how large our team has gotten over here at Tech Data recently. So this is, we're divided up into two different segments. So our business development team, which I'm a part of, we're here to go-to-market plans, business development, work on those end-of-quarter ELAs for you, keep you apprised of all of the latest, greatest VMware offerings. Then this is our corporate operations team. So these are the guys you will be working with day-to-day, quoting, licensing team. And I might be a little bit biased, but the best in the business. We have a great team here to support you. Okay, so if you haven't done so already, check out our Tech Data Invites program we've recently released. So Invites are targeted to partner sales reps, and they provide small, digestible pieces of content put together to help you quickly get up to speed on VMware solutions, since there are so many. Very easy to download, free for iOS and Android devices. Just search for Invites CD on your App Store. Invites include presentation on all the VMware technologies. They have promotional info. And one of my favorite features are the customer-ready scripts. So you put in your customer information, their name, when your meeting was, and it generates an email you can send right out to your customer. Very professional, great features on there. And it is new to Tech Data. It's a Tech Data exclusive. So this is made for our partners. It's made for you. So if you have feedback on it, if you have suggestions on it, we welcome that. We want to cater this to our partners. So again, that's Invites TD, free for iOS and Android devices. So money slide. Right now there are some great promotions for virtual SAN. Beginning with a 10% off the front end for VSAN opportunities, 6,000 and above through the Advantage Plus program, on top of the standard 10% benefit. So this extra 10% accelerator expires June 30th. Great push to get those VSAN orders in before the end of the quarter. Second promotion, or the other two promotions that are going through till September 15th are, first of all, the virtual SAN bundled with VDPA, VDPA being VMware's backup and recovery solution. So bundle those together at a 20% discount. And then we have the VSA to VSAN upgrade at 20% off. So virtual storage appliance, or VSA, went end of life last month. So a great time to upsell to VSAN. And then finally, and something I haven't ever seen VMware do before, is the Tesla promotion. So sales rep with highest volume, all virtual SAN sales close through the end of the year, December 31st, will be awarded a Tesla Model S. So pretty cool. I'll be happy to send you more information on that, the TNCs on the Tesla promotion. What our customers are saying, just a few quotes from satisfied customers on how virtual SANs generated new revenue streams, help customers reduce cost of ownership, storage and automate storage management. If you look to white papers and customer success stories, reach out to me after the webinar and we can look at success stories that are pertinent to your company's strategy. I'm happy to provide those, and they are out there. All right, go to market. So if you're still kind of shaky on how to begin marketing virtual SAN, plenty of marketing campaigns and tactics available for you to drive virtual SAN to your customer and prospecting base. A couple of notables, and my two personal favorites are, first of all, Grid Campaign and then Website in a Box. So both free resources available on Partner Central under marketing. So Grid allows you to create essentially a microsite for your company and brands at your company, so around specific VMware technologies. VSAN is included, so just a little hint, that would be a great place to start for Grid campaigns. And then Website in a Box. Also free, 2 lines of code, syndicates VMware content to your website. And my last slide before I hand it off to Tim, how to learn more on virtual SAN or other VMware products or the team. Reach out to your Tech Data VMware specialist. That includes myself and then the team map I showed you earlier. Any one of us will be more than happy to help you. download the Invites TD for free. Great content on there. There's presentations, email, and then visit Partner Central. So there's so much more on Partner Central, and I would be happy to walk you through it and show you what would help you out anytime. All right, I am going to pass to Tim Sandy. Happy to have him today. He's a VMware system engineer, and he's going to kind of give a virtual SAN 101.
Welcome, everybody. Again, my name is Tim Sandy, and I am a VMware systems engineer that is dedicated to data. Because I am dedicated to tech data, I'm kind of a unique systems engineer. I'm not a tech data employee. I'm a VMware. So it's a big value add for tech data to have me here. I'm the only systems engineer that's assigned to a distributor, and tech data is the only one. So that is a big advantage for them. Just a little reminder, if I could have everybody put their phones on mute, otherwise I will have to go ahead and do a mass mute across the board for the session, but I'd prefer just everybody to mute their phones if you don't mind. And please don't put us on hold, because if you do, we get to listen to your wonderful music while you're on hold, and it makes it hard for me to kind of present. So I appreciate that. So let's get started. Again, today's presentation, we're going to talk about VMware Virtual SAN. This is a relatively new product that just came out, so a lot of you may have little to no information or knowledge about it. This session here, I'm going to try to keep it pretty basic at a 101 level, more on the kind of sales side of things. We are going to talk about some technological concepts, but I'm going to keep them kind of on the easy side. I'm not going to get real in-depth, so don't worry about that. So let's get started. You know, to kind of understand what virtual SAN is, what it does, you got to kind of understand a little bit of the history with SAN storage. Back 20, 30 years ago, before virtualization, all your storage was localized storage on the server. You had a 1-to-1 ratio. You had a server with an OS and your application on there, and it had local hard drives on there, and that's where all your storage was. If you had a file server, you would take a physical server, load maybe a Windows OS on it, and you would add a bunch of hard drives to it, and there's your network storage. So that's about 20, 30 years ago. Then in the past 10 to 15 years, things have changed a little bit. Virtualization came on, and with the onset of virtualization comes the need of having shared storage. And that's the way it's been for the last 10 to 15 years. So if you're at all familiar with virtualization or VMware, typically your virtual machines, the actual files that consist of that virtual machine are usually housed out on a shared storage somewhere. Part of the reason for that is because when you have multiple hosts and you want to use those nice features of Virtual Center like vMotion and high availability or fault tolerance, to where it moves it from one host to another, so that if a host goes down, it will move it over to another host. That way your server and applications stay running. In order to have that, all those hosts have to be able to talk to that shared storage. So that's kind of why you have to have that shared storage. Now today is kind of a mix with storage for different reasons. There's, like I said, there's different key drivers as to why that is. Now we still use a little bit of localized storage, not so much anymore. We definitely are still using a lot of shared storage. That is a necessity, again, especially because of virtualization. But now also we're starting to push a lot of our servers, applications, our workloads, and even our storage out into the cloud. So some of the drivers behind that is the onset of flash drives, your SSDs. The reduction of cost in your hard drives, both your normal physical spinning disk hard drives along with your SSDs, the prices have come down. And also the need for storage has dramatically increased, and it just compounds itself each year. So with that and the ever-changing environment, mobility with the cloud and everything else, obviously the storage footprint has changed a little bit. So when we first developed Virtual SAN, we had our beta version before it went GA in public. What we did is we opened up this beta version of the Virtual SAN software, and as you can see there, we had over 12,000 participants that downloaded and used Virtual SAN beta. And after the beta test was done, they polled all the participants. And as you see, 95% of the beta customers said they would recommend VSAN, which is very impressive because typically when, I don't care what vendor, what software, whatever you're talking about, to have that kind of buy-in on a beta product right out of the chute, that's very impressive. They also asked them, if you kind of take a step back for a minute, when virtualization first came out, we came out with vSphere and we took that compute stack where, again, like I said before, it was that 1-to-1 ratio. You had your server with your localized hard drives, your OS, and your application on that one. It was kind of a 1-to-1 type situation. And then when we came out with virtualization, you now can have one physical server running multiple virtual instances of servers on that one physical box. So that was a huge leap forward in IT when that happened. The beta users, or the beta participants, basically said, 90% of them, that they feel that virtual SAN will do the same thing to storage as what, when we first came out with virtualization, did to the old method of a 1-for-1 ratio to servers, which, again, is very, very impressive. So you've got a lot of buy-in from people that are really feeling that this is, there's a great interest out there. They believe that this is kind of the way of the future, virtualized storage. So when you're talking to your customers, you're going to have a lot of interest out there. Now, one thing that's a little bit different when you're talking to your customers previously and you're talking about the various different suites of software that we have, typically there weren't a lot of necessarily hardware or software requirements that have to be met. Virtual SAN is a little bit different. It does have some hardware and software requirements that have to be met in order to use Virtual SAN. So you need to be very aware of this so that when you are talking to your customers that that you can present this to them, that they understand what you're saying, and when you're quoting out specs for some servers to use in conjunction with Virtual SAN, that you make sure that you're doing it properly. So starting off, because of normal redundancy with cluster-based type concepts, you have to have a minimum of 3 hosts to use Virtual SAN. And that's all about redundancy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. You also must have on those hosts ESXi 5.5 or higher installed. Now, the reason for that is because unlike some of our other products where you have to install a virtual appliance to gain that capability, the great thing about Virtual SAN is starting with ESXi 5.5 hypervisor and up, Virtual SAN is basically baked into the hypervisor already. There's no virtual appliance you have to install. You don't have to load a Windows server and then load some sort of software to get new capability. It's already in the hypervisor. Next thing is you do require at least one SSD, solid-state disk. You need at least one physical spinning disk traditional hard drive. And then you also need a specific controller card, which is called a pass-through controller card. Now, there is the hardware compatibility list for Virtual SAN, and I've got the link on one of the subsequent slides, by the way. But for the SSD, the hard drive, and the pass-through card, you need to make sure that those particular items are on the hardware compatibility list to make sure that basically those items, VMware has gone, tested them, fully vetted them against Virtual SAN, and has certified that, if you use these particular pieces of hardware, that they are fully supported and certified so that when you call in for support and you have an issue, VMware will support you and get you through resolving the issue. So just to cover some basics on Virtual SAN. Again, Virtual SAN is baked into the hypervisor itself, so there's no software you need to install, no appliance. What it does is we talked about previously with that 1-to-1 ratio where you have a physical server, you have local hard drives on there. So now what we're doing is we're taking that server, we're putting an SSD in there, and we're putting, again, at least one physical standard spinning disk hard drive in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull all those resources. So in this example here, we've got 3 hosts, 3 servers, 1 SSD, 2 hard drives per host. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to create a virtualized SAN shared data store. So what it does is it looks at those localized disks, the SSDs and the hard drives, clumps them all together into a big data store. So now you've created a virtual SAN. There's some other comments here on the basics. I'm going to skip those for right now because we essentially will cover them in some of the subsequent slides, so we're going to go ahead and skip that for right now. But just understand the concept there that we're basically taking all that localized storage, those hard drives, and virtually pulling them together in one big virtual SAN. So why would somebody be interested in virtual SAN? You know, what are the benefits? What does it do for somebody? Why virtual SAN maybe over a traditional SAN? Kind of break them down into three main categories. First one being simplicity. Again, because the software essentially is baked into the hypervisor, it doesn't take but a couple of clicks to pretty much install virtual SAN and have it up and running. And I'll show you a quick little video of that process here in a couple slides down the road. Now, I used to be a server administrator. I used to manage a network and Windows servers. And one of the things that I came across was I had to learn how to start dealing with SAN storage. Now, SAN storage typically, and when you get to a decent-sized environment, you have a dedicated SAN administrator, and there's a reason for that. Because when you use a traditional SAN, you have to have fiber channel cards in your servers, you have to have a fiber channel network, fiber switches, have the SAN itself. That takes up a lot of space in your data center. It takes a lot to cool it, a lot to power it and everything else. And the managing a SAN, it's almost like a specialized career field, for lack of a better term. But it takes specialized skills to do that, and it takes a lot of training. So the great thing about virtual SAN being already baked into the hypervisor is that literally a couple of steps, you pretty much have VSAN up and running, and guess what? Your VMware administrator that's already used to using the vSphere, the vCenter web client, basically he can pretty much know already how to manage virtual SAN without having to go and pay thousands of dollars for additional course. The time it takes to learn that, the time managing that, he basically already has the skills to do it. And it uses policies to manage it, making life easier. You set the policy, and then from then on, it just follows those policies. When you add additional nodes, it will go ahead and automatically tune virtual SAN to adjust accordingly. There's not a lot of management involved in that. And for me, being an ex-administrator, I like that concept because it makes less work for me, because nowadays, as an administrator, you're doing more with less people. So that kind of wraps into the simplicity of the management. Now, because we had talked about the virtual SAN being in the hypervisor, using SSDs and a pass-through card, essentially, in a very basic description, what you're doing is the communication between the virtual machine and your storage. It's almost got like a direct pipe down to your SSD from the VM, so it can read and write very quickly. VDI environments where you're running virtual desktops especially are very read-write intensive, and I/O, that communication between them, it can be very intense. Well, because of the SSDs that are attached, it acts as a cache or buffer for that reading and writing. So basically, you can go about your business, make changes on the servers and everything else. The SSD will handle it, and because it's baked into the hypervisor, and you got the pass-through controller, it doesn't have to go through several layers of communication translation type of communication, which typically will slow that down. Because of that direct access, the performance is phenomenal on it. So here, it talks about 2 million IOPS across 32 nodes, and the great thing about it is, again, the way virtual SAN is designed is whenever you need additional storage, you just literally add additional hard drives or hosts, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. Now, in today's environment, I don't care what company you are, what department you're from, money and budget is a big issue right now. We're doing more with less, essentially. That's kind of the way business is now. With that, obviously, people are very concerned when they're going out and doing large IT purchases. IT is a big kind of drain on a company's pocket, either for the personnel to manage it or the actual equipment and the operations itself. So the great thing about Virtual SAN is it's built into the hypervisor. There's no learning curve for your admins. You don't have to send them off to training. It doesn't cost you $3,000 for a course, just for one course for them to go learn the basics. There's no learning curve for your admins on that, which comes back and basically lowers your operational cost. Also, when you're first buying into Virtual SAN, you just have to start off with 3 nodes. Down the road, if you decide you need to expand, you need more storage, you need more IOP capability because of your applications, you simply add additional hard drives or Virtual SAN nodes. So you can kind of expand as you need to. And it's also very linear from a budget perspective to where you can really plan that out. Whereas a traditional SAN, you really have to forecast your needs for the next 3 to 5 years, because buying a traditional SAN is such a huge expense, and there are limitations. A traditional SAN, besides all the hardware and everything else that goes along with it, it has a head unit, which is kind of like the brain, and there's a bunch of shelves of hard drives. Well, that one head unit is limited to the number of hard drive shelves it can manage, essentially. So if you outgrow your SAN storage, you may have to buy a whole other head unit and additional disk shelves. Well, that's almost like buying a whole new SAN. And it's kind of hard to predict that, and especially when you're looking at budgets for IT departments. With Virtual SAN, it's literally just adding additional node and everything else. Your operational costs are less because you're not paying for the additional power, the additional AC. It's a lot quicker and easier to install. It doesn't, again, require that specialized knowledge. So again, your total cost of ownership going into it and then down the road is much less. So we talked a little bit about the requirements to use Virtual SAN. Now, when you're speaking with your customers, there's kind of 2 ways that you can quote out a system for them to use Virtual SAN. One is what is called a Virtual SAN Ready node. Basically what that is VMware has gone out, and again, we talked about that hardware compatibility list, which the link is on the bottom of the screen there. That list has a bunch of the controller cards, the hard drives, the SSDs, and servers that are all compatible and certified to use with Virtual SAN. These Virtual SAN Ready nodes is basically the vendor has gone in, grabbed a server, grabbed SSD, hard drive, pass-through controller, and everything else, and thrown it in there, and it's like a pre-built system with all the items that are on the hardware compatibility list, so that whole entire system is ready for Virtual SAN, and it's certified to run, and then you'll get full support. So that's the easiest way to quote out a Virtual SAN setup for a customer. Now, you can kind of build your own. If you happen to have servers already that are on the hardware compatibility list, and then you just want to go out and piecemeal and buy the SSDs, the hard drives, the RAID controller, you can do it that way. Again, just make sure you're referencing that hardware compatibility list to make sure that they aren't there, and then you can piece it together and you can build systems that way. So you have the 2 choices. You can do the quick, easy way with the ready nodes, or you can build a specific system by doing it. Now, we talked about that VSAN requires a minimum of 3 nodes. The reason for that is any cluster technology requires a minimum of 3 typically. And the reason for that is it's all about redundancy for hardware or any kind of failure, really. Now, in this example here, you'll see that we had a couple of VMs. You got 3 Virtual SAN nodes. You got the hard drives in them and everything else. The problem is that if you had less than 3 nodes and you had a failure on one of those nodes, then you're only left with 1, so you have really no redundancy, because the VMs that were running on that would have to get migrated over to the other one, and then you may not have the appropriate resources, and the data may not be there. So again, minimum of 3. And just to kind of show you a little visual representation, if you had a failure with Virtual SAN, whether it be a hard drive or whether it be an actual node, as we kind of step through here, and first it was showing a hard drive failure and then an entire node failure, and as you see it moved the VM over to the other node. Now with 3, as you see, the way it works with clustering is across those nodes, all that information is copied. So when that node went down and it moved the VM over, it then follows up and makes sure that there's a copy of that VM over on the other node. So again, it's very simple to set up. via policies. You can select which VMs react how and within those policies. And so whether you lose a hard drive or whether you use a host, you're not going to get any data loss because there's that redundancy, and there's no downtime because it moved that VM over. So that way your servers and your applications are up and running at all times. Now, we talked about, again, if your need has grown to where you need to add additional storage, whether it is actual storage as far as, actually gigabytes, terabytes of storage, or whether it's related to applications like SQL, Exchange, stuff like that, they're a little more, or virtual desktops, they're more IOP intensive. If you need to be able to handle more IOPS, there's different ways you can handle that. And as you see here, once you start off with your 3 nodes, you can then expand from there. So it started off, we had 40 terabytes of storage, and then we added another node, and again, has SSD and traditional hard drives in it. So we went up to 400 terabytes by adding that node, and plus our IOPS went up. Okay? So not only can you scale out, you can also scale up. And that representation there shows that, okay, we don't necessarily need more IOPS, but we need more storage space. So we can add more hard drives to our individual servers, and by doing that, it's increased our storage, as you see there, but yeah, our IOPS didn't go up. But you have the capability to always do both. You can add hard drives to give you additional storage and scale out so that you get your increased IOPS. So virtual SAN is very elastic, very granular, and the great thing about that is, typically we're talking about expanding where the need is always more and more and more and more, but let's say you sell off a division of your company and now your storage needs have greatly reduced. Well, the great thing with this is that these are servers that you can now, if you don't need as much storage anymore, you can scale back as well, and then you can reallocate those servers to be used for other purposes. With a traditional SAN, basically you've got a bunch of storage just sitting there that you're not using, and that's wasted money essentially. So we're very elastic, and we can scale very easily both up and back, whether you're talking about storage or IOPS. Now, some maxims that we have here, traditionally, this is kind of more on the technical side, but just so you know, virtual SAN, you can scale up to 32 nodes. Across, in considering when you have the max of 32 nodes, you can go up to 3,200 virtual machines, which will give you 2 million IOPS and 4.4 petabytes, which is huge. Most people are familiar with, at their house, either gigabytes, and some people are used to terabytes. Most enterprises right now are usually working in the terabyte range. Well, petabytes are what terabytes are to gigabytes. So you got gigabytes, then you got terabytes, and then you got petabytes. Okay, so when you scale out to 32 hosts, fully loaded, you can go up to 4.4 petabytes. So the chances of you hitting that wall of not having enough storage is pretty much unlikely at this point in time. Now, who's to say in another 20 years, but 4.4 petabytes is huge. So real quick, I just wanted to show you, I said that I'd kind of show you how easy it was to enable virtual SAN, because since it is using the vCenter web client and it is already baked into the hypervisor. Let me just show you this video real quick here. So you're already in the web client, you click on your hosts, you go over to Manage, you click to Edit, and you turn on virtual SAN. And then you have a choice of either putting it on automatic or manual. And just real quick, basically what that is when you put it on automatic, all the hosts that you put into the virtual SAN cluster, it will go and look at all the local storage on those and it'll add it in to that big one shared data store. If you put on manual, you can basically pick and go out and say, okay, I want this particular drive, this SSD, and everything else, and you can get more granular. I just wanted to show you, there's a little bit more to that, obviously. You have to set up some networking. You have to put the product key in for a virtual SAN. But I just wanted to kind of reinforce my point earlier where, again, how easy it is and how there's not much to it. So there's really not much of a learning curve for an administrator to learn how to manage virtual SAN. They don't need to be a SAN administrator to be able to manage now a virtual SAN. So it makes it very easy. We talked a lot about cost savings, of course. Again, on the front end, when you're first looking at purchasing SAN storage, there's a huge cost traditionally. Using or purchasing virtual SAN, again, because you can start off with 3 nodes and then expand as needed. Your initial capital expenses is greatly lowered because you're not forced into kind of plan ahead, how much storage and everything that I need 3-5 years down the road, because it's just as simple as adding additional nodes. So the initial upfront cost for all the hardware and everything else is much less than traditional SAN storage. Again, you don't need all the fiber channel network, switches, HBAs, and I'll get a little technical there, but all that stuff that's required for traditional SAN, you're not having to buy all that, which is extremely expensive. So you can just build as you go. So that initial capital expense is much lower. And then from an operational expense, again, your administrators are already familiar with the web interface. There's no learning curve. You don't have to send them off to training, so there's no training costs. Less time managing, which is a huge operational expense savings. And again, with all the storage profiles and everything else, again, the management that much easier, and again reduces your operational expense of that. And I mentioned before, just for the data center itself to have a traditional SAN, that big hunk of metal, it creates a lot of heat, so you need extra AC for that. Also, the power to power that requires a lot of power, and then physical space too. And with just doing a host instead of this big clunky virtual SAN, you end up saving a lot. So in the end, without getting into it's 25 cents IOPS, $50 for desktop, we're not going to get into that. But again, reduced capital expense, reduced operational expense, so your total cost of ownership, your TCO, can be reduced up to 50%. So that's a huge savings. So that's when you're talking to your customers and they're asking why virtual SAN, all those reasons for the cost savings as well as the management and easy to expand, it's very elastic. Those are the reasons you want to tell them why virtual SAN. So virtual SAN is packaged a couple different ways. There is the standard standalone virtual SAN package by itself. It's fully featured. There's no scale limits, so it's not like it has additions like some of their other products where there's a standard enterprise, stuff like that. It's just virtual SAN. Now, one big benefit, traditionally, for those of you who are a little bit familiar with maybe quoting or talking about your vSphere licensing, traditionally distributed switches is only available for when you buy the Enterprise Plus for vSphere. What they've done is when you purchase virtual SAN, they basically have included that vSphere distributed switch capability into it. So you're getting some functionality. So even if they're on, say, vSphere Standard, they're going to get that benefit of the distributed switches, which is normally not until you get up to the Enterprise Plus level. So that's a huge benefit there. It is a per CPU, perpetual license. One note that you can, but when you build out your environment, again, you have to have that minimum of 3, but as you expand out your virtual SAN nodes, if a node is participating in the virtual SAN cluster, it does have to be a license with virtual SAN. Even if it doesn't have storage on it that's contributing to your total storage amount, if it's in the cluster, it does have to be licensed, so just food for thought there. Option is virtual SAN for desktop. And, again, this is really geared around your VDI solutions, whether it be Horizon View or XenUp Desktop. If somebody's going to be specifically using this virtual SAN environment and this cluster for the virtual desktops only, there is a specific package for that as well. And again, as you see there, per concurrent user license. Then we've got two kind of promo pricing packages here, virtual SAN with data protection. So basically what they do is they bundle your virtual SAN standalone with your VDP Advanced license. Again, per CPU, perpetual license, and this is a limited time promo pricing. And the next one, in case some of you are or are not familiar, the VSA to virtual SAN upgrade. VSA was a virtual storage appliance. It was kind of a more simplistic approach to virtual SAN, and it was an actual virtual appliance that you had to install. So there, for those of your customers that do have VSA currently and they're looking to upgrade to Virtual SAN, there is a special promo pricing to upgrade from VSA to Virtual SAN. So again, that's for a limited time. That concludes the presentation on Virtual SAN. I'd like to thank each of you for joining me today. Again, my name is Tim Sandy. I'm a VMware Systems Engineer, and I'm dedicated to Tech Data. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to your Tech Data representative, whether sales or technical, and we'll be happy to help you out with any questions you have. Again, we're not doing a question and answer just because of the sheer number of people we have on here. So feel free to follow up, though. We will be putting the presentation out onto the Data Training Camp website. We have our VMware YouTube website for Tech Data, and we typically put out our presentations out there, so if you want to review it, you will see that out there hopefully in the next couple of days. So I thank you again.